Welcome once again to the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. When the board of directors at iGaming Ontario announced at the end of August that it had found a successor for Martha Otton after a year-long search, it came as somewhat of a surprise, given that the organization's new president and CEO was working just down the street, literally speaking. As Canadian Gaming Association President and CEO Paul Burns told us during his latest appearance on the podcast last month, Joseph Hillier is no stranger to Ontario's online gaming marketplace. The McGill University Law School graduate was the Chief of Staff in the Minister of the Attorney General's office back in 2020 when Doug Downey and Company set out to create Canada's first private sector-driven iGaming market. Hillier accepted the AGCO gig after 19 months as the Chief Strategy Officer and Corporate Secretary for the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. 50-something days since moving into the new role, Joseph Hillier joins us from iGO headquarters in Toronto for his maiden appearance on the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's great to finally be here. Absolutely.
Hey, but I just want to start. Like I said, I think we're recording this on Wednesday, October 29th. I think you're about 51 days in the iGO offices now. How's the transition been for you so far?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Thanks again for having me on. You know what? The transition's been really great. Obviously, you know, some of the reasons you mentioned about my background and experience in the sector and my knowledge of the agency as well. And you know, about 5 or 6 weeks into my tenure now, really kind of focusing on two key areas. And I don't think these will be a surprise to you or possibly your listeners. You know, first of all, you know, really digging into that commercial side of things. And that's our operators, engaging with them, understanding where they're coming from. You know, what I'd like to really do is position the agency, not just as a government oversight agency, but really as a business partner for those operators. And, you know, that's looking at our own processes internally, you know, being an advocate for them with government or with our regulatory partners. So that's a key priority. On the other side of the coin, and I think this also really makes a lot of sense as well, is, you know, looking really closely at the responsible gaming side of things and the market integrity piece. And, you know, what can we do as an agency in terms of coming to that table with strategy, with relationships, and making sure that our players have those supports that they need to have confidence in the market, and really balancing, you know, what I've been saying is, you know, healthy players making a healthy market. I think that's the kind of ecosystem I'm really focused on.
Joseph, is it fair to say that this is kind of an iGaming Ontario 2.0? You know, as we've said in both the newsletter and the podcast, Martha Otton deserves an awful lot of credit for getting this market up and running very quickly back in April 2022 and getting, you know, 50 operators on board, creating the framework to launch this market as, you know, as I mentioned off the top, the only one in Canada. And, you know, so do you feel like you're kind of coming in and there is a bit of a fresh start? Maybe isn't the right expression, but obviously your mandate is going to be much different than the one Martha had when she took the job.
Yeah, and you know what? Huge respect and kudos to Martha for all the work that she did. I remember, as you mentioned, I was on the ministry side at the time and worked really closely with her. So very exciting in times and a lot of expectations. And I think, look, like, you know, you kind of hit it, right? We're at 50 operators, 80 websites, over 5,000 games being offered to our players. And I think we're at a really exciting time of maturity and evolution for the agency. And I think, you know, where I look to is how can we continue to build on that promise of you know, open, competitive, private sector driven market that is really also player forward as well. And so that's kind of how I view my mandate. And I think, you know, the other piece that really the groundwork has been laid is the economic development story for Ontario, right? For operators, whether they've got boots on the ground in Ontario or not, they're a part of that story. And I know the minister is really focused on that, and we're really focused on how can we play our role in continuing to facilitate and deliver on that. And that's a real critical focus as well.
Hey, Joseph, I'm sure you've been asked this 100 times every which way you can, but, you know, as I mentioned off the top, this search took an awful long time, and it feels like they had someone in the office next door that they could have brought on board earlier. And I think uh, we've questioned why it took so long at times. But maybe you can just tell our audience about, give us the backstory and how that process went, and what led to you finally accepting the job and taking office.
Absolutely. And you mentioned my time at the minister's office. The iGaming file was actually one of the first policy files that landed on my desk in September of 2018. So, it's a rare experience, certainly as a political staffer, to not just stick with a policy file throughout, the initial stages all the way through development and launch, very successful launch, I might say. And then to actually, be with the regulator in that sector, and then to be in the seat I'm in now is pretty full circle moment for me. When the opportunity came up and when Martha announced her retirement, it of course crossed my mind. It's, a market that I've gotten to know and love quite a bit. And I think I've actually become pretty passionate about the benefits of a regulated market that has the private sector, driving it, and those player supports, those kind of two pillars again. So for me, it was just a really exciting opportunity that I'm really quite privileged to be in this seat, and I'm really excited about what comes next.
Was there a specific point or a conversation, Joseph, where you thought, yeah, I really want this job? Because again, I remember you and I and Ben Valito sitting in a room at the Metro Toronto Convention Center back in June, and both you and Ben at that time were pretty passionate about what the two of you were doing on the AGCO side, and it seemed like, the iGO job wasn't even in the back of your mind at that point.
You know what? I think that's a really good point that you raise about the work that we were doing at the AGCO, and I think it actually really speaks to what also should really highlighted the opportunity at iGO. My work at AGCO really gave me an opportunity to get to know the agency and work with them closely on a whole host of issues. And big credit to my former colleague Ben Valito, and he's been a real driver on the responsible gaming space. And to me, I think what I brought as a candidate for the role, and what I bring now to the seat is that value add in terms of having the end-to-end perspective, whether it's government, whether it's regulator, and bringing that passion again for the private sector piece and also the responsible gaming piece, which it's an interesting process and approach that the Ontario market took, but we really, I think, exceeded expectations, and the proof is in the numbers. When you look at last year, we had 3.2 billion in gross gaming revenue, and we're well on track to that already. And we've still got some really exciting betting seasons coming up, and so it's just it's a huge privilege to be part of that legacy.
I just wonder, I got to believe too, Joseph, that your experience with helping create the market in Minister Downey's office, and then with the Attorney General, and then your experience at the AGCO. And, we're recording this interview in maybe the craziest week. Well, it's been the craziest week since I started covering this industry back in February 2021. The FBI investigation that was made public last week. The prediction markets, that news cycle started last week with the NHL announcing the Kalshi and Poly market were going to be partners, getting to the point where, we now have Trump Social and True Social and Crypto.com are going to have a partnership, and they're going to bring a prediction market to the U.S. as well. It just seems like a seminal moment for the industry, and I'm thinking that your texts and emails and your phone's been blowing up this week talking about what's going on south of the border. And also there is, we had Paul Burns on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and Paul talked about the customers demanding different products, and he's following the prediction market situation very closely in the U.S. where there's still an effort to make to bring liquidity and daily fantasy sports to the market here in Ontario too. So you're taking this position at a very there's no other way to put it. It's a crazy time for the industry right now.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on. I think, a lot of the points you've touched on speaks to why I'm excited about what's in store for the market. I mean, I think there's so much opportunity for innovation from the operators, consumer choice for our players. I think, where I view our role there is playing that bridge and making sure that, where we can advocate for our operators to be, have the flexibility they need to bring new products to market and to provide that offering to our customers, our players, is absolutely critical. But I think too, the other piece of that is, our role as conductor manager to make sure that both sides, both players and operators, have trust and confidence in the integrity of our market. And I mean, you've touched on a number of things there. AGCO, of course, Alcohol and Gaming Commission, has a very strong role from the regulatory perspective and an enforcement perspective. And we are really committed to being collaborative with our partners, whether it's in the sector or in the regulatory space or government as well, to not take those foundational blocks of the market for granted, and making sure that we're sticking to our original mandate of private sector innovation and competitiveness, but that real also strong, robust player support.
Hey, Joe, so someone mentioned to me, I think last week, that one of your immediate goals was to speak with every operator under iGO's purview, and I just wonder if you've been able to do that in 50 days, and also what are those conversations like, and are you hearing, is there a common theme with what operators are looking for from iGO right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely committed to doing that. Not quite there yet, but we're probably almost, I think, at 2/3 of the operators so far. We were, recently at G2E in Las Vegas and had a really great opportunity to meet with about a dozen of them at the time. Look, it's been fantastic. I think, what we've heard pretty universally is widespread support for the work that we're doing. I think everyone really appreciates the collaborative and open dialogue and type of relationship we have. When I've kind of spoken to them about being that business partner, that's really, I think, aligned with what they're hoping they're going to get from us as an agency partner. So that's been really, really encouraging to have that approach validated. And look, I mentioned those two pillars, right? The commercial side and the responsible gaming side. Not very surprisingly, if you know the sector well, all of our operators, I would say, are so closely aligned on both of those things, because they recognize the interconnectedness of them and how they both really build and support the sustainable market framework. And so that's been really, really encouraging to have those conversations. And honestly, for a number of them, they're still genuinely excited about being in Ontario and about delivering new products and coming in and capturing new players, and how important that is for us to continue to progress. So I've loved the conversations, and I'm really excited to continue them.
Yeah, and I think, and again, this is a topic that we've covered extensively, Joseph. I mean, when this market opened 3+ years ago now, it's almost like from day one, everybody talked about consolidation and how long were the small fish going to last before they were swallowed up by the big fish. And you and I had this conversation today in October 2025, and I think we've had less than a half dozen operators leave the market here. We haven't seen consolidation. And I think you mentioned, you referred to Bede at G2E as a success story. But it seems like different operators in the marketplace have found their niche. I mean, obviously FanDuel is a big brand, especially because of their partnership with TSN, and we see all the partners that have got on board with Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment. But it does feel that there's a lot of operators that are doing quite well in this market and have carved out a niche for themselves.
Absolutely. And the Bede example, which I did mention in the panel that I was on at G2E as well, great example. New entrant to the market, provided an innovative product, targeted maybe some underserved demographics, and have really been very successful. And I think you spoke with the CEO from them not too long ago. And to me, that's also where I think our role comes in as the conducting manager is, what can we do in terms of looking at, our own processes, how we interact with operators to make sure that we're still facilitating that competitive nature, and that there's kind of a spot for any operator who can meet the regulatory expectations to come in. I think that's been a proven part of our maybe not so secret recipe to the success of the Ontario market is really welcoming all of those. And I think, again, I think it kind of exceeded everyone's expectations. To your point, we had the really large operators, or what folks will call the whales, but then we've got a whole host of small operators from actually a pretty diverse set of jurisdictions, right? You've got some in Malta and Gibraltar, but then you've also got some small operators that are growing right here in Ontario. So again, overall, great economic news story.
Hey, and what's to say when we've had people from both High Roller Technologies and Absolute Bet on the show? I mean, what's to say when those two operators not only are coming into the market, but they're excited about coming into the market, even though in essence everybody else in the marketplace has a 3-year head start on them, and we're not including OLG there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what I take from that as well is not taking any of that for granted, right? I think we have to continue to look at ourselves as an agency to make sure, okay, this is still successful. We still have people coming in and doing that. How do we keep that pace and momentum and make sure that we continue that promise? And so that's been really my commitment with my team and with the operators as well, is, if there are pain points or rubs, we want to hear about them, and we want to look at that. And we want to hear what works in other jurisdictions that, we have a peculiar regulatory framework, which, happy to talk about that as well. But again, I think because of this conduct and manager role, we actually are uniquely placed to help facilitate some of that competition and innovation. So it's something that we can't lose sight of, and it's going to really, I think, influence a lot of our decisions still to come.
Ready to accelerate your digital growth? Bede Gaming delivers a market-leading platform with best-in-class products driven by secure, cutting-edge technology. With an open API platform, robust integration suite, and unlimited configurability, you can achieve the ultimate end-to-end customization for your iGaming ambitions. Bede Gaming is your partner for success. Get in touch at bedegaming.com. I want to get to the pain points in a second, but I just, when you talk about the commercial side, can you just flesh that out a bit more for us? Because again, we have a lot of people listen to podcasts that aren't veterans of the gaming industry and don't quite understand that relationship between the AGCO and iGO. And we've heard over and over again that iGO, that mandate on the commercial side. I mean, what's that mean exactly?
Yeah, so for those listeners who haven't really dived into the intricacies of the Canadian gaming landscape, so the structure set out in the Criminal Code, which is a federal statute in Canada, charges each province with what is now, almost terms of art called conduct and manage the gaming sectors in each of their jurisdictions. And so in Ontario, that has evolved into having, you've got obviously your central government, you've got the Alcohol and Gaming Commission as the regulatory body, so sets the standards, the expectations of compliance, penalties, those kinds of things are all set centrally there. And then you also have a separate agency body that conduct and manages, effectively oversees contracts with operators in the sector. And so in the online space, that's iGaming Ontario. And of course, you've got in the land-based casino space, that's largely the Ontario Lottery Gaming Corporation, OLG, who also has their own online platform offering as well. And so, in terms of where that brings us is we become effectively this go-between between our private sector operators and all of our regulators. And that includes, of course, our federal anti-money laundering regulator, FinTrack. And so, the kind of pro and con, I guess, to that system is you do have this added layer for the operators to deal with, which I think is fairly unique, if not entirely unique in the global span of things. But what that also does enable us to do, and I think with the right mandate and perspective, is it allows us to be an active partner and facilitator with those government entities. I think government entities all have their own priorities and mandates, and what we can do at iGO is distill some of that, engage with our operators to make sure we've got clarity for them on things that matter, and then we can take their concerns, their suggestions and innovations, and translate that back to government and explain why it benefits the sector, why it meets all of our mandates, and how we can work together then to bring some of those changes to pass. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think, not all of it has been properly tapped, I think, in terms of focus. And so that to me is one of the, you spoke to kind of what my value add might be. I think given that I've had experience in almost all of those spaces, it enables me to kind of, I think, cut through some of the static sometimes and really provide clarity to both sides.
Let's get to the pain points. I guess we'll call it the elephant in the room. And again, it's very well documented that the market here in Ontario, that operators would like to see a centralized self-exclusion program in place. And I think now we're 15 months now, I think, since an RFP was granted, or RFP was out there. 2 companies, including IC360, were awarded that, and the marketplace is still waiting for that self-exclusion program. Can you just give us an update on that?
Absolutely. And I think early on, I think even in the initial release that brought me in, I had identified, centralized self-exclusion as one of the key priorities. And look, it's an essential piece of the responsible gaming pie, right? For us and for our operators. We've got a really, really good partnership with DataWorks and IC360 in developing this platform. We're well underway. Work is continuing quite a pace on this, and we're also actively engaged in talking to our operators about it and making sure that this system actually works for them. If all of our operators can't access it, then we don't have centralized self-exclusion. So that's a critical piece. We're in real close lockstep with the AGCO as well to make sure that their expectations are being met. And look, I try not to give too specific timelines because my staff will start sweating. But ultimately, looking to have that hopefully publicly out there by mid-year next year. And I think we are definitely on track for that. Continues to be a very collaborative engagement with our operators. And again, kind of speaking to what I said before, they're all so supportive of this initiative. And to your point, Steve, really recognize the need for it in any mature gaming sector. And so I think it's a really exciting piece for us, and really also appeals to my priority of focusing on those player supports and how we're getting that right.
Yeah, and you mentioned AML, Joseph, and it seems I can't have a conversation with anybody in this industry these days without talking about AML. And if you look at Derek Ram from Connectify example, I think Derek's posting almost, it feels, hourly on LinkedIn right now about what's going on in AML, and rightly so. And you take this position at a time where obviously we have a political landscape south of the border that nobody can figure out, and if they tell you they have figured out, they're full of what. Again, what is iGO's place with anti-money laundering, and what is it that you can get done on behalf of your operators and working with your operators, the AGCO and others?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Stephen, and happy to discuss it because, as we know, it's a real hot topic for our Ontario operators. Kind of back to our conduct and manage discussion. We do play that intermediary role, right, between the operators and the federal regulator of this space, which is FINTRAC. So we currently have a pretty robust program around the anti-money laundering reporting. I think what we can all agree is that there's lots of opportunity there for automation and innovation in terms of how we're collecting that information and how we're delivering it to the regulator. So we've engaged with a really cutting edge tech supplier, Symphony AI, and developing a product with partners at EY in terms of how we can configure that to really handle this reporting and what has really become a fairly labor intensive item for our operators. And really excited about what the implications of this system are. We're looking to automate significant portions of the reporting requirements for our operators. There's a lot of work that's already gone on, and we are full steam ahead on a bunch of things. But again, this will also be a really critical point where we engage a lot with our operators, because this is such an important piece, not just from a systems perspective, but those obligations with FINTRAC are really important, and we need to make sure that we're striking the right balance of meeting those obligations but also reducing that burden on operators. And where, again, I think it provides us as the conductor manager, we've got that unique opportunity to take hopefully a lot of that manual processes out of the picture, automate things, make it more standardized, which won't, not only relieve the burden, but will also really enhance our understanding of the data in the space. And I think it's going to be really, really exciting. And we should have a lot more to say on progress in the new year.
Yeah, and it feels like that's a win-win, right, Joseph? But yeah, I'm sure you don't want your staff handling manual reporting, and again, we've heard it very loud and clear from operators their frustration with the reporting structure, and that they have expressed their concerns about the lack of innovation and the tech capabilities at iGO. But again, as I mentioned, I would think it's a win-win for everybody concerned by driving that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think everyone on both sides of that coin are very excited about the opportunity.
Joseph, the other thing I wanted to ask you is, I'm sure you were there when Stan Cho, the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Gaming, spoke at the Canadian Gaming Summit back in June and spoke about the gaming review that was going to take place. I just wonder what iGO's role is in that review, and is that process underway?
Absolutely, yeah. So kudos and to the minister for starting this review. I think it's a really exciting opportunity for the gaming sector and for Canadian consumers. I think in terms of what our role, I think it's to it kind of speaks to the broader sector collaboration and how we can share lessons learned in the conduct and manage space. Kind of speaking to some of the successes we've had already. And I think as the new CEO here, what I'm hoping to share as well is kind of those two focus areas, right? Is how as conduct and manager we can balance that real critical piece of commercial success with player supports, and how the success of both of those are critical to a sustainable gaming sector across the entire province. So really excited to see where it goes, and we'll be waiting to hear more from the government.
Hey, you've got a unique perspective because you have worn so many different hats around this industry since it launched. I'm really curious about your thoughts on how the Ontario market's different from what we're seeing around the world. And, really, it's a bit of a tumultuous time for the industry right now. We talked about the U.S. earlier. We see, I think it's in Denmark this week, they announced that they're placing a ban on gambling advertising, but during game broadcasts and in-game broadcasts. And, we've mentioned AML. There's still a lot of conversation around responsible gambling and what can be done. But, are there one or two things that really make this market unique? Other than the success, as you mentioned off the top, just the success of the marketplace. I mean, we in the newsletter last week, Dave Briggs pointed out again the online casino numbers and the money that's being driven by this marketplace. But what else stands out to you?
I think honestly, I think so much of it has to do with the diversity of the operators and the players. I think when we think back to the launch of the market, there were certain expectations around sports betting versus casino. I think the dominance of casino has really surprised a lot of folks in terms of how critical that's been. So I think it speaks to where Ontarians want to go. And when I think back to that launch, and I think maybe this is what set us aside a bit from other jurisdictions, is we really wanted to go to where the market was in terms of understanding what we needed to do as a government at the time to make sure that it was ultimately a success. So I think the success that we have today and what sets us apart is as much about what we're doing right now as it is about what we did at launch. We're still young, we're 3 years in, 4 years now. And so still, I think, learning, and I think that's also part of it. I think it's our willingness to look abroad and see what works and see where we can pivot. I mean, centralized self-exclusion is a great example. I think we recognize the need and we're going to do it. And that'll be, something I will commit to doing going forward as well, is what are the best practices around the world that we can adopt here? And I think it's that openness. I think it speaks a bit to the Canadian mindset as well, where we're often looking outside for understanding of what's going on within. And so I think that plays into our uniqueness as well in the space.
Hey, two more questions. It's interesting the relationship between the iGO and the AGCO and OLG, and I don't know if you call it an uneasy alliance, but like people like Dave Pridmore and Duncan Henne and Tianda Kerr, they show up at the conferences. They talk about Ontario. Dave Pridmore admitted very early in the competitive marketplace here in Ontario that basically, having a competitive marketplace really forced OLG to up its game, and the corporation still sees incredible success competing with 50 operators. But what just for our listeners, what is that relationship between iGO and OLG, if there's one at all?
So, I mean, from my perspective, I would say it's quite robust, and I would certainly say friendly. I mean, of course, from my time at the AGCO not so long ago, I've developed a great relationship with Dr. Karen Schnarr there as CEO and registrar, and I think iGO has always had a history of working really closely with AGCO on a whole host of things, and I expect that to continue. And look, I see the opportunity with OLG as well. I think there's all kinds of common objectives and priorities to work on together. I've had outreach, and we've gone back and forth with Duncan Hannay as well, and I expect that conversation to go on. And I mean, we each play a really significant role in the economic success story in the Ontario gaming sector, right? And I think it's continuing to how we can collaborate in ways that are appropriate, given our various roles and responsibilities, and they are varied across that spectrum. But I think also too, I think Ontarians expect their agencies to work closely and to collaborate and come up with common solutions that make sense for everybody. And I think we're all, not to speak for either of them, but I think we're certainly going to continue that conversation, and that's certainly my commitment to do that as well.
Yeah, and I have to ask too, Joseph, just to follow up, is just the relationship between yourself and iGO and the Canadian Gaming Association.
Oh, look, I mean, I've got a lot of respect for Paul Burns. I mean, he is such a huge asset to the sector, and such a powerhouse in moving so many critical priorities forward. And my commitment there as well is to maintain open and consistent dialogue. We had a great meeting with the CGA and its members at G2E as well, and it's those kinds of meetings that I think are pretty common sense for me in terms of understanding what's going on as a sector and engaging with all the varied parts of it. So I'm really excited to continue to work with them. And, I think they're going to, of course, continue to be a critical component of the success of the market, I think.
Hey, last question, Joseph, and I know it's a cliche one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And it's kind of, what keeps you up at night with this job very, 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 very early in the process, and kind of what gets you excited, and what you're thinking about when you get up in the morning?
Yeah, look, I think I would imagine that any executive of a government agency is always very mindful of delivering on its mandate to the people of Ontario, right? I think I don't want to get too overstating it a bit, but it's a pretty sacred trust when you're responsible for these kinds of agencies and charged with delivering on those economic benefits to the province. So that really is something that guides me all the time. And I think all of the things we've talked about, to be honest, Steve, are things that I'm very mindful of in terms of setting the right course, keeping the momentum. I think the one of the biggest pros of iGaming Ontario is that I think we style ourselves as quite private sector oriented in terms of how we do things, and that creates expectations as well. So I'm very mindful of that to keep me going. In terms of what I'm excited about, I'm certainly excited about delivering on those two platforms we talked about, and a year from now discussing how successful that's been. So I'm really excited about that. And then you've highlighted a whole bunch of interesting things going on in the sector, and I think that's what really kind of energizes me about this job is there are always new innovations and problem statements coming out to resolve. And again, how do we, going back to my kind of original thesis statement on this, is how do we marry that balance of commercial success, competitiveness, innovation with those player supports, responsible gaming, and market integrity. And I think the two of them marry so well together that if that right balance is struck, then I think success really will follow. And so if I had to say one thing that keeps me up is how do I keep those two core pillars in balance and not take them for granted going forward.
Yeah, and I think you're not alone. Not alone on that one, Joseph. That's Joseph Hillier, the new president and chief executive officer of iGaming Ontario. Joseph, Paul Burns and I had a bit of fun there. I was told him I was going to give him a commission check there a couple of weeks ago because you mentioned to him during a conversation that you were going to join us on the podcast. But seriously, it's really great to have your voice here. It's an important voice to have around the industry, and I sincerely hope that we can make these appearances a regular thing to have you on the Gaming News Canada show.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's really been terrific to be able to join you today, and absolutely happy to make this a regular thing. And I think there's so many more conversations we could have. So really looking forward to it. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Joseph. That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. As always, you can find us on Substack, also at gamingnewscanada.ca and on the various podcast apps. You can also watch this interview between Joseph and I on the Gaming News Canada YouTube channel. Again, thanks so much to Joseph Hillier for being with us today, and we will see everybody again very soon.